welcome. I will go ahead and have the panelists introduce themselves first. So if you want to go ahead and start, Catherine.
Hi, everybody. I'm Catherine Liao, and I am the Chief Strategy Officer at a company called CardiX. At CardiX, we pioneered and developed a device that can non-invasively monitor your central hemodynamics. The company has been around for about 25 years. It's commercialized, and our technology has been used in pretty much all major hospitals, major academic research centers, and we are currently in the process of commercializing a home health monitor. Prior to that, I was a co-founder and CEO of a company called Blumio, where we developed a radar-based sensor that's being used for blood pressure monitoring.
Hi, everyone. I'm Micah Sharp. I'm a Deputy Director for Strategy at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And as part of my work, I'm focusing on strengthening the women's health R&D ecosystem, as well as the diagnostics ecosystem. And this is really a globally important problem that we're all trying to address together. I'm also co-chair of an initiative that NIH and the Gates Foundation initiated last year called the Innovation Equity Forum that aimed to bring together stakeholders in women's health R&D to help identify what are the main problems we need to solve and how do we best bring communities together to solve them.
Hi, everybody. My name is Stacy Salvi. I am the Vice President of Product and Strategy at a company called Movano Health. We are the makers of the EV Ring. It's a smart ring. I'm wearing it here. That is designed with women's health in mind. We are also building the device to be a medical grade device, submitting it to the FDA for pulse oximetry. Prior to Movano, I was at Fitbit and Fitbit Google for 8 years. So wearables are near and dear to my heart, and looking forward to talking to you all about them today.
And I'm Monica Heifel. I'll be moderating this panel. I have been in the tech industry for a very long time. My last position was Vice President of Sales and Marketing for the Americas. I made the leap into health because I had an autoimmune condition where I learned a lot about health and wellness, went back and got an education in nutrition, and now empowering women on their health journeys to optimal health. So, and also part of the founding director, as they said, of Women in Electronics. So let's start with you, Catherine. Your company, CardiX, specializes in cardiovascular health technology. How do you see FemTech intersecting with cardiovascular health? And what innovations are you most excited about in this space?
I mean, cardiovascular health impacts everybody. And ultimately, as we live longer and healthier, at the end of the day, we all still die of a cardiovascular related disease. When it comes to women's health, I mean, that is actually at the core of just health in general. An area that I've been focusing on is really around maternal health. So as an example, I don't know if, I suspect that many of us don't know this, but the placenta itself during pregnancy is an organ that will have a tremendous impact on a woman's vascular health. And when the development of the placenta doesn't go well, that actually ages the artery prematurely. And as a result, that's actually why a lot of women end up experiencing cardiovascular events earlier due to that. And so what if we can have better insights into arterial health and imagine a future where that a Movano ring can tell me exactly what is the status of my artery, how is it function, right? Today, all the data that we have is a brachial blood pressure measurement, and which is very, very crude. What if I can tell you exactly what is your artery's function, how well it's aging? Are you aging prematurely from your, in terms of your arterial health? And in fact, are you healthier compared to someone who has the same chronological age versus, or are you doing worse than someone with the same chronological age? That's something that I'm really excited and passionate about and driving towards too.
Can I add something to that? Because I think you are pointing out one important misconception where people tend to think that women's health means sexual and reproductive health. And it's actually one of the big things we're trying to change, because women live 25% more of their lives in ill health than men. Only a small fraction of that is due to conditions that are only in women. a lot of it is due to cardiovascular diseases or conditions like autoimmune diseases that just affect women disproportionately and at higher rates than men.
Well, that leads us to a question for you. The Gates Foundation has been a strong advocate for global health. How does FemTech fit into the foundation's broader goals for improving healthcare access and outcomes?
Sure, yeah. I mean, our mission is really to make sure that everybody can live a life full to their full purpose. And we know that women are oftentimes the carriers of their communities. When women thrive, communities thrive. They're impacting not just themselves, but also everybody around them. And so we've always had a really strong focus on improving the lives of women. But I will say, even for us, it was oftentimes focused on sexual and reproductive health. We have a very strong family planning program that is investing in new contraceptive technologies. A lot of our work in HIV, malaria, TB, etc., is focused not only on full populations and therefore trying to be gender intentional and gender transformational where possible. But then there's also, and then maternal health has always been a strong focus. But more recently, we discovered that we're actually one of the largest funders of women's health R&D behind the NIH, despite the fact that we didn't have a specific program focused on women's health. So that changed. And we are now have a focus on women's health innovations, really looking at diseases that affect women disproportionately or differently, primarily in the infectious disease spectrum. So STI, sexually transmitted infections, gynecology, menstrual health, and then, as I already mentioned, contraceptive technologies.
Stacy, Movano has been at the forefront of developing wearable technology for health. How do you see wearable technology evolving to address the unique health needs of women?
Yeah, that's a great question. So wearables in general are pretty well accepted at this point. But I think there are really three kind of key things that Movano is, putting investment towards, particularly for women. And really, it goes along with the evolution of wearables in general. Starting with just having something that is beautiful and nice to wear, comfortable to wear. Certainly, when we think of aesthetics, it might not be the very first priority, particularly if you're managing a particular condition. But for the rest of us, we would like to wear something that's comfortable and also looks nice as well. But more importantly than that, it's really key for us to make our devices accessible. So, making them something that everybody can afford, putting them under HSA and FSA programs, and reaching out to as many people as possible is really critical to affect that health on a population level. And then really the third thing that is very near and dear to my heart is, what are people actually doing with this data? I find that wearable manufacturers are in a race to put out a wide quantity of metrics, but they're not doing the best job of contextualizing those metrics. So making that data more accessible, more understandable, and taking, this is what the EV Ring does, is we take disparate data types, we contextualize it, and provide some degree of education around it for our users. So I think these are critical steps to helping people become healthier with the products.
Excellent. Thank you. Back to you, Catherine. Your company has been at the forefront of integrating technology with healthcare. What are some of the key challenges you've encountered in this integration process, specifically within the FemTech sector, and how have you addressed them?
Oh, it's super challenging. First and foremost, I don't think there's an easy button for it. So going to any kind of healthcare system, you have to understand workflow, number one, right? If it adds clinical burden, it's not going to happen. So and of course, you won't know what the burdens are and what needs to be changed without you're in with the customer. And of course, every healthcare system works differently. So number one is workflow, understanding that. And then secondly, it's the payment model, right? At the end of the day, right, that we need to understand how does a practitioner or a healthcare system get paid for a service as they deliver. So as an example, for a lot of healthcare systems, right, if they're all on running Epic or Cerner, whatever EHR tool that they use, and there's a workflow that's built in where that there are certain procedures and there's process like called checkout, right? They add they'll order a procedure into a shopping cart, effectively into a basket, and then there's a checkout process. And as data comes back in, they have to close out that case or that basket. Until that happens, they can submit for reimbursement. And so really understanding where does your technology, yes, it's very important to have demonstrate the health economics and the improvement in health outcome, but we also need to understand how can we integrate it so then it can be operationalized. And I think oftentimes we don't think about the operational aspect of the healthcare system. We just think about, hey, this is a great tech. We can do this thing for the patients, but without operationalizing it, it will never see the light of day.
Any comments? No? This next question to you, Micah, but I'm sure there'll be other comments from the other panelists. What are some of the key external influences, such as the environment or regulatory factors, that impact the development and adoption of women's health solutions globally? And how does your organization address those factors?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. So I mentioned the Innovation Equity Forum, which was basically brought together to identify what are some of the barriers to women's health R&D. And so last fall, we issued this Women's Health Innovation Opportunity Map that's available on the NIH's website and can easily be found online if you just Google for it. But was basically trying to identify what are key opportunities and key gaps across the entire value chain, because it starts with the data. We don't actually understand a lot of the burden that exists when it comes to women's health. Part of it is driven by lack of diagnostic availability for example, conditions such as endometriosis or menopause, which nobody really measures what the symptoms are at what point in time, etc. The other one is lack of valuation. Postpartum hemorrhage, which is responsible, or which is the cause of most maternal mortality in the world, is significantly undervalued when it comes to global burden of disease metrics, because it's basically based on an artificial metric that was set decades ago and underestimates the blood loss and how it impacts women over months of their career. So that's where we're starting with, which is hard. If you don't have the data, people don't actually see the business case. You then get into the regulatory space and the challenges that exist with running clinical trials in women, because there's always this fear of legislative or of legal action if anything happens, of not wanting to run trials in pregnancy. Women were not included in clinical trials or didn't have to be included until 1993. In the US, which means that a lot of the drugs that a lot of us are taking on a regular basis have actually never been tested in women. And then you get to the later stages, which is reimbursement, financing, etc. And we don't have enough products that are being paid for. In fact, it's very hard for organizations to prove that they should be reimbursed for example, novel contraceptives if you have to compete with something that has been on the market for 50 years. If we would have any condition where there would have been as little new developments as in contraceptive technologies over the past 50 years, it's kind of shocking. There's really not much new things that have been happening. There's more advancements coming down the pipe. But it goes through the channel. I think on the positive note, though, a lot of these things can be addressed, and there's a lot of movement. Many of you might have heard about the White House initiative around women's health. There's a lot of movement globally. There's a global alliance for women's health that was founded by the World Economic Forum in January this year. And so organizations are really coming together. And one of the things that's been really exciting for us to see is how much collaboration there is, because a lot of the companies and a lot of the investors see this as a major opportunity, but also as something where there are a lot of common challenges that are impacting innovation overall and not just for one individual competitor.
Any comments? No?
I'll add something to that. I actually think that's actually what makes it so exciting. We are certainly riding the wave of the investments in women's health. Certainly, our company is a finalist in an NIH-funded program that's called Rapid Acceleration and Development of Technologies, or RADX. So that was announced about 2 years ago to accelerate technologies that can address maternal health equity. And so through that, we are obviously getting more visibility and getting more attention. And of course, just this year, there was the announcement of the ARPA-H funding that is putting $100 million towards development of innovations around women's health. And of course, we know that that's probably just a drop in a bucket when it comes to overall venture funding. But hey, we are actually seeing opportunities in there, which also means that has an impact commercially, because I also want to I know that we're talking about sensors and engineering. Boy, that's some tremendous opportunities that could happen for folks working in that space as well.
Thank you. And actually, Stacy, for you, it kind of follows up on this. What challenges have you faced in bringing female-focused health technology to the market, and how have you overcome it?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, what Micah was saying really dovetails into exactly what our challenge is. So Movano Health is quite a small company. It's about 30 people with, at any given time, 6 to 10 women that work at the company, but we're building a product for women's health. So it's not a large enough, and it really never will be a large enough data set to work with our employees to gather data over time. So where do we go? We go to NIH studies. We go to any publicly available research that's out there that's specifically on women's health. But guess what? There isn't a ton. There's not a lot. A lot of studies have excluded women for the reasons that Micah was saying. Either the risk of pregnancy or menstrual cycle is simply too complicated to gather that data, so they are excluded for a more consistent result. But that also means that we're missing an enormous amount of biometric data on women. So I think that's one of the largest challenges that I've had as a product developer, in really trying to determine how do we help women contextualize what they're seeing from this passively collected body data. The way that we're trying to overcome it is by working with our user to log a lot of information in a really streamlined fashion. So I can't simply guess from what I'm seeing on the ring what mood she's in or how much energy she has, although I could see possibly how much activity she's done, but that's not always correlated. So we do depend on really those inputs of information to help us really understand what's going on with her. So I think that's probably the key challenge there.
Thank you. Catherine, from your perspective, what are the most significant external influences impacting the FemTech industry today? And how can companies navigate those influences to achieve growth?
Oh boy, that's a challenging question. External forces. I mean, as you've heard from Micah, there's certainly, publicly from a governmental level, like there's a recognition that, women are not just men with different parts, right? And so
shocking.
And so when it comes to healthcare related burdens and disease and so on, our bodies fundamentally function differently and will respond differently. And so in order to improve overall quality of life for everybody, we need to really take that into consideration. And now finally, right, in 2020 somewhat, that there's a recognition for that. And so I think that's definitely a big force of driver. I suspect that that's also tied to, people are living longer, and part of living longer is that healthcare expenditure goes up just by having a longer life. And so we are seeing sort of what is the impact of people living longer and the costing associated with that. And then needing to then understand how do we keep not just men healthy, but also keeping women healthy as well. So that's that external force that I see. what do you think of that? I feel like you are, Micah's in the forefront of it, so I'm kind of getting the wake from what Micah sees.
Yeah, I think the external forces are interesting, and I mean we are a global organization, and in fact most of our work is focused on sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And so I do think one of the things that's really important is how to think about women's health in different cultural contexts, political environments, etc. Because I think there's oftentimes a very quick sense of, ooh, this is tricky territory, and it really isn't. Like there is nobody you can talk to who will say, I don't care about women actually surviving childbirth or surviving other diseases. And like regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum, on the cultural spectrum, on the religious spectrum, there are different ways how you have the conversation, but you can always have the conversation. And so I do think it's really important to not see any of the external factors as unovercomable. And I do think, in fact, there is a lot of ways in which, for example, using more personalized healthcare, using more self-influence can help. And then thinking about where are gender norms impacting whether or not we can do the work that we want to do, and how do we overcome them? Like we know for contraceptive technologies in some countries, it's really important that they are hidden and not openly visible, because there are women who want to use contraception without their husbands knowing about it. And so giving them the choice to be able to drive and have that agency is really important. So male contraceptives are less relevant in that context, but it doesn't mean that they can't be important in other contexts.
That's so interesting. So what role then, Micah, does collaboration and partnership play in FemTech? And that's actually an answer for a question for all of you.
Yeah, I think we started answering that a little bit on this is a very collaborative field. It is so early on that I think one of the things that's really exciting to see is among a lot of the startups, among the funders, among the even the larger companies, there is a lot of collaboration. And so some of the things that we are trying to help facilitate is bring, for example, industry together, bring different pharma companies together and understand why are they not investing more? What are the challenges? Understanding from medical technology companies or other electronics companies, what are their challenges and what are the systemic barriers that are keeping them from moving forward? And then bringing people together and help overcome those together.
I was just going to add that, not all companies can do all things. So everybody getting together and playing off one another's strengths with this collective end goal of making people healthier on a population level, it always feels good to get together and do that. And when you really sit down and talk and understand what technologies people specialize in, there's an enormous amount of opportunity.
What about policy influence? How can policy changes at the local or federal, state level help FemTech move along? I'll just throw that out to everybody.
Funding. So if you think about it, I'll use pregnancy as an example. Pregnancy care, most people don't know this, but it's predominantly funded out of Medicaid. Right? It's not the insurers that's actually paying for most of the deliveries that happen. And so by nature that being the case, that means that there's usually a fixed amount of money that's available. And so I think there's an opportunity to potentially look at how that's being funded. Is there an opportunity to innovate from a healthcare funding mechanism when it comes to different stages of a woman's life?
Yeah, I think we have great examples from some other disease areas, right? If we look, for example, at rare diseases, and it's kind of sad that we have to think about women's health as a rare disease because it really isn't. But some of the things that regulators can do is increase one is just require the data to be collected because we actually don't have enough data. And so by requiring the data to be collected, you can make sure that we close that gender data gap, but then also create incentives. Create similar things to what we have in rare diseases, where basically if you develop something that is a breakthrough innovation for a women's health condition that's under researched, you get faster approval for one of your oncology drugs that you want to bring to the market faster. I mean, there are a lot of policy incentives that you could use. And so I think that it is really up to regulators, policy, but also the private sector to decide to move forward in this space, because it is a huge opportunity. I mean, one thing we are trying to drive as funders is to make sure that we do have the right requirements for organizations that apply for grants to say, okay, if you want to have money from us, we actually need to see sex and gender disaggregated data, because it's been going on for too long that there's a lot of studies that are run and we don't actually know whether or not things work in different sexes, for example.
So before we go out to the audience for questions, what tidbits of information would you like them to know or understand regarding technology for women?
For me, this is not actually specific to women. I think obviously AI is all the rage and so on. One thing that I'm seeing and I'm really, really excited about is really the notion of digital twinning in health. So what we are starting to see now is, at least for my company and the data that we have generated, it's actually being used to construct digital twins. So now imagine I can have a virtual parallel of how your individualized cardiovascular health and how your body will evolve based on different inputs. I think that's something that is really exciting in the next 5 to 10 years that we'll see start to emerge more and more. So just as an example, and not everything's related to cardiovascular, but this is more metabolic and kidney, that there are systems out there whereby it can see that whether a diabetic will develop chronic disease in 3 years' time. And just by building and developing a digital twin and modeling and building on that.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just be aware of the huge opportunity this field is.
You took mine.
You can expand more of that. And then not just from a business sense, and I'll let Stacey talk about that, but also really just from an impact perspective. These are important problems to be solved. And I think it will take a lot of smart people across all fields to solve them. And then specifically, because I know a lot of people here working on sensors and engineers, whenever you are testing anything, make sure that you test it in diverse populations. Because I think that is really the first step, how we address some of the disparities that exist currently, is by just making sure that we build things and we build sensors for all populations and not just for a subset.
Yeah, I think you actually hit on a couple of points that are incredibly important in my line of work. But I do think that the business opportunity is very real here. And there is a common misconception that by building for women, you're building for a niche market. Now, women are, of course, 51% of the population and influence or control 80% of the household spending. So it's certainly not a niche market. And literally in every group that I go and speak to, when particularly an investment group, when it's a group of men and then there's a few women there, the women always come up to me and they say, it's about time somebody built us something that was specifically geared towards us. So the business opportunity is very, very real. But then again, I'm just to reiterate Micah's point around when you are building something, to really take a step back and not necessarily just build for yourselves and really think about, who am I building this for? What is the use case? And how can I test it against, particularly in a wearable context, against different skin tones, different sized bodies, different form factors in that way. That's all really critical to, having a successful, high quality product.
Beautiful. So we wanted to spend a few minutes and open it up for questions from the audience, if there are any. How much time do we have? I can't see with the light shining in my eyes.
Yeah, there's a lot of light.
Hi, I'm Kylie Burgess from 219 Design. We're a small product development company. We're about the same size as Stacey's company.
Movano.
There you go. Thank you. We've done some wearable stuff as well, and I was interested in. We're talking a lot about how there's this women's cycle and stuff playing into, research having a hard time wanting to take that data out because it takes longer and it's less the daily cycle versus a monthly cycle, that kind of thing. And I was wondering how things like the rings and stuff, the wearables, how that helps in not only consumers and knowing their own body, but in research. Does something like the wearables, does that help gather that information in longer term areas that's maybe not having to go into a clinic? Just wondering if you're seeing any trends with that as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's a great question. So, I think first and foremost, when we think about wearable data, the reason that I get super excited about it is simply because you go into your doctor once a year, you're with them for maybe 15 minutes. They're looking at the computer. They don't know what's gone on the other 364 days. But a wearable really can bring that to light and demonstrate trends and really look at things like one of the areas that I'm particularly interested in is perimenopause and menopause. So we know that longitudinally, a woman's sleep is really affected during that time of her life. She can go in and describe that to her doctor, or her wearable data can just come up and say, yeah, in fact, her sleep recovery index has degraded over the past 6 months. This is how much she's losing. And then, ultimately maybe she can track hot flashes during sleep, that sort of thing. So I think that's one area that I would be very excited about currently investing in.
I particularly like the notion of, quantified self has been around for a long time, right? But now with wearables, there's this notion of we can all become citizen scientists and contribute our data. So now instead of having a formalized study to get a woman into a sleep clinic to trying to pick up these menopausal cycles, what if we just simply had, these rings on 1,000, 10,000 women, right, that are experiencing similar things, and see how our data compares to someone that may be going through something similar, and how would that accelerate the pace of innovation when we have that data available?
I would also add with the cycle in general, I was at Fitbit when they launched their menstrual cycle tracking product. It wasn't the first in the market, but they got more menstrual cycle data than any single study within 2 months' time. And from that, they were able to see that the resting heart rate decreases at the beginning of the cycle and then increases at the point of ovulation and then comes back down if you do not get pregnant. So it's kind of surprises me, to be honest with you, that people haven't come out with more, higher fidelity products that are more accurate around even just simply period prediction per se. But I would say that within the next year or two, somebody's going to come out with a pregnancy indicator, probably with a common wearable before, that rivals any sort of off-the-shelf P test.
I guess this isn't a question, but you had said earlier that, that it's nice to wear something that's pretty and all of that kind of stuff. I agree. But I am allergic to cashews and pistachios, and so I have to carry an EpiPen around. I actually go out of my way to buy the AviQ instead because the form factor is a little square. It can fit in a pocket, maybe not a women's pocket, but a little clutch, whatever. And I've always been told that the best epinephrine is the one that you have on you. And so that's what I'm able to carry around with me. And so I feel like with these wearables and stuff, if you have a big watch with a big clasp that's annoying to use when you're using your computer, or if the ring is like too thick or anything like that, it's not something that you're going to wear. You're not going to have women signing up for research to collect the data if it's not wearable. So And if it's pretty, that helps.
It
But
helps.
it needs to be wearable also. So I love that aspect of focusing on women's wearability as well.
The aesthetic component. And I hear what you're saying as well, which is, you need to carry something that is life-saving. Similarly, my best friend and my father have type 1 diabetes, and they wear, a Dexcom monitor. It doesn't really matter what that looks like because it's life-saving. So I think it's a balance between, having something that looks nice, something that's fun to use, and then also the utility and the purpose behind managing or treating a condition.
I've heard so many stories, and I have friends who have major food allergies and they leave their life-saving devices at home so they don't have to carry a purse with them, or there's a lot of facilities that don't let you bring in a bag with you and things like that. And so any of these improvements, I love to see it.
Sounds like that could use a Bluetooth chip to remind you if you've left it at home.
That's a good idea. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. Do we have any other questions?
Hi, I'm Vinitha. When I work in the semiconductor industry, and so a lot of what I do involves like data acquisition. And so I noticed that what I do currently plays a big part in data acquisition, transforming analog data into digital data. I guess I'm curious about the other side of it, where it's once you have that data, right, there has to be some sort of feedback loop in which you have all this data and then you say, hey, what do I do with this? So what are some, I guess you were mentioning, if there is a way that a Fitbit data can be communicated to a doctor, or so what are some ways that you guys propose that people receive this data and do something about it, right? Because none of this data is useful unless a doctor looks at it and says, oh, look at this, like, communication. So I was wondering if the mechanisms that you use to recommend the person, like, what are the next steps, are self-regulated, or if it's a doctor telling them what to do. So what are the avenues from that, data acquisition to telling the person what to do next?
Okay,
It's okay. I can take it too.
Okay, I'll start. So what is a big challenge when it comes to anything in healthcare, right? Oh, this piece of information is so good, but so what? Am I going to make an action on that? And it is on the incumbent of the producer to essentially make the data insights useful. So the way I think about it is really around, well, what existing evidence is there and how credible are those evidence? I mean, there is a wealth of research out there on PubMed and so on. Their researchers are constantly looking at those insights. Now, the question is, when does it become interesting information to now medical information and now need to cross the regulator's pathway and now just become FDA regulated, right? So for example, a blood pressure measurement is FDA regulated, whereas heart rate isn't, because you are not making a medical diagnosis. A heart rate is 75 versus 82. It's not something, that's not enough data to make a medical diagnosis. Whereas your blood pressure is 140 over 92. Yeah, that's something that you need to take action. So I think it really comes down to step one, you get the data. Step two is, well, what does that data tell me? And what are the existing information that is out there? Step three, which is now, what is the outcome I'm hoping someone will do with that data that will then give you the direction as to, is this interesting data or there's something actionable here? And then therefore continue on the path from thinking about how do I make that data increasingly meaningful and valuable.
Yeah, and I think step 0 in order to make this even possible is to have more common data standards, right? Because right now, a lot of the data doesn't speak to each other. A lot of the data sits in hopefully electronic medical records, but oftentimes just paper records. And so unless we find a way to actually say what are some common data elements, and then start to bring those together, it's going to be really hard to make all the future steps that I agree with work well.
Yeah, from what I've seen today, the way that a patient might share data with their doctor is relatively rudimentary. So it's, initiated from the patient over to the doctor, and it's probably not integrated into the doctor's readily available EHR. So I do see that as a major future opportunity. So one, making sure that we're all talking the same language from a data perspective. And then two, being able to share that. And even more valuable is being able to share it in real time. And I think one of the things that medicine misses in general, for everybody is really this concept that we don't really treat an illness until it's like right in our faces. And where I see wearables have a major opportunity is this notion that, we catch something. It's like a check engine light, right? We catch something well before it becomes a real problem. So even pre diabetes, for example. And once, we do have this ability to share this data readily with our trusted provider, there's going to be, I think, a lot of really good health outcomes from that, just in the mere prevention.
I'd like to just maybe add an area to look into is that every biomedical engineering department in every university has a lab that they're actively looking at data and what to do with it. And so that's always a great area to align what you're working with a lab that potentially is already doing something with that data that you're collecting or similar to it.
Okay, we are out of time, but I want to thank the panelists for all their great insights.
Thanks, Monica.
And thank you all for joining us today.